a university professor, and I don't know if I'll send my kids to college. And when I talk to my kids about college, it's like, well, it depends on what you want to do. There's certain things you're going to have to go to school for, but there's a lot of things you don't. And just increasingly a business model. It's increasingly about get the maximum number of students through. We don't really care if they're really even doing that well. The idea is to be able to use your brain and think and debate and discuss and then create brand new ideas. That used to be what the university was. And I feel like at least within the classroom in the universities, it's not about creating new ideas. It's not even about discussing ideas. You can't have certain ideas.
First of all, I really enjoy your Twitter account. Well, X account now, right? So I actually follow it quite closely, and I really enjoy some of your takes. And I wanted to ask you this, right? I wanted to talk to you about a few things. One of the things I want to talk to you about, since you're a neuroscientist, and I've been immersed into neuroscience, not as a scientist, but I've been learning a lot. And actually, it made me a much better parent. And I'll share that with you a little later, what from the neuroscience I took and applied to parenting and how some amazing results that I've achieved. But you being a neuroscientist, I wanted to ask you, how do you apply what you know to your parenting tactics, strategies?
What a great question. I would say, so I think the biggest thing, is, to give you a little bit of background, my background in neuroscience is more on like movement. So how is the brain control movement and disorders of movement? So I know it's been more a little bit about learning about the neuroscience of learning, like how learning works. And I'd say that has had a bit bigger influence on the way that I parent. And so I teach a class, currently I teach a class called physiology. So it's basically just all about the body. And I actually, a couple of years ago, I started this lecture. It was kind of a gift to the students. It was just basically the physiology of learning, which is really more of a neuroscience thing. And we just kind of talked about how the brain takes in information, under what circumstances it takes in information. I'm sure all these things that you're familiar with, right? That if you are really that you're more receptive to information, and if you're in a joyful and a playing state, if you're really excited about what you're learning, if you're, those kinds of things. Also, if you're talking about that there's this forgetting curve. And faculty, teachers love to just complain, the students forgot it from last semester. And I was like, well, if they're not constantly reusing it and then reusing it in different ways, then they are going to forget it. And so it needs to be, and I think that has had a big influence in the way that I think about different curriculum for my kids. So you can think about curriculum as like there's the spiral approach, which is where you teach them something and then you teach them a little bit more about that and a little bit more about that, but you're constantly re-hitting the same topic over and over again, versus the idea of like unit studies or like segments. So you could be like, okay, we're going to teach you everything about clocks. And then we're going to teach you everything about, arithmetic, like how to add things. And then we're going to teach you about, right. And then it's kind of blocked that way. And as you probably recognize, the spiral approach actually is much better for that learning curve, right? So that you're kind of constantly hitting, making sure you're not forgetting information. So that kind of stuff has influenced me a lot. In terms of like psychology, that has more to do with, kids in particular, but everyone should actually really want to learn what they're learning. And that when we put them in environments where they're just being told you have to learn this and there's no real life experiences, that they just shut down. And we've known that for, an incredibly long period of time. And yet it's just not really applied.
It's one of the reasons why we chose unschooling. It's one of the many reasons we chose unschooling. And I actually enjoyed your thread a couple of days ago on the advantage of unschooling. But one of the reasons is because I believe that interest-led learning is the way to lead in terms of like what kids want. So homeschoolers, I think a lot of times mimic curriculums of schools, and I don't understand that. Like you really have the advantage of taking advantage of the interest-led learning, let the kids learn what they want. Like my son, I'll tell you the neuroscience part of it where I incorporated, but first I just want to tell you, like, he studied math. The second he started being an entrepreneur, started making money, well, guess what he wanted to learn right away? Interest, derivatives, all about math. Like we took a deep dive, full immersion right away, because he wanted to know all about money and investment and how to make money in his sleep, right? So, because I explained to him a very simple concept. Once he started making money, I told him, unless you invest it, if you're going to spend it, you're going to have to work for the rest of your life. But you can invest that and have money make money for you right away. That idea was like mind-boggling to him. Really? I can just make money off money? That's great. How do we do that?
And we should be teaching all of our kids that in school. That should be what's being taught.
That should be mandatory. But I have my, I have my conspiracy theory suspicions of why that's not being taught. Because honestly, I've learned compound interest to my shame and embarrassment in my mid-30s.
Oh
And
yeah, no, we knew about compound interest. My husband's a data analytics, but we did not appropriately apply it financially until our mid 30s either. And we're like, our kids are gonna know this like now. Like we're gonna get them
yes,
like
because
props
really
now. Like,
time is what matters in compound
yeah, time
interest.
is what matters. We just don't have as much of it. We're gonna make sure our kids got enough of it.
My son has an investment account since he's 6 years old. His
Yeah,
own money, he invested into stocks right away. I showed him, we opened him a Webull account on my name, but it's his account. And it's a game for him. He's checking his stocks. He's losing money, making money. He likes to log in and check out how his money is doing. It's a fun game.
yeah,
It's like Monopoly, but with real money and real accounts now because
right.
you have that. But as far as neuroscience goes, I'll share you because both you and I are big believers in books and reading for kids. So I've actually, even though we do read a lot to kids, but I've manipulated them to be physically addicted to kids, to books using
I can see
neuroscience
that.
and behavior psychology. Yeah, because what we
Yeah,
did is it's like this three-step process that I tell all my friends about and I tell everybody about it. So first, we know from behavior formation, behavior design, that if your motivation is low, you're not going to do things that are difficult, right? So we got to make it very easy. So we set up this room where there's a library. They have their own bookshelves on their level. There's good beanbag chairs, good lighting. So it's always easy for them to access to books. There's also a huge variety of books on all kinds of topics. We heavily invest into different books because we know novelty is important,
right,
right? So the Ken environment are called comfort, autonomy, and novelty. It has to be comfortable. There has to be autonomous, so they don't need you to ask you for help, and they have to have novelty that empowers them to be interested in different topics. The second step, because we also know from behavior design that behavior requires a trigger, right? So the trigger that I use is boredom. Boredom is phenomenal, old forgotten parental trick.
it
We
is
overload kids with stimuli these days, but if you get your kids bored, amazing things happen.
amazing.
So in our households, we unplug the router to the router. Unplug the router. That's it. There's no internet. There's no TVs. There's nothing to do. 3 hours into it, kids get bored out of their mind. Guess what they do? They go and start
Pick up a
reading
book.
on their own. And the third thing I do, that's from neuroscience, and that's random intermittent reinforcement. So every once in a while, we catch them reading, and we're gonna make a big deal about that. We're gonna shower them with whatever they want. We're gonna take them out for ice cream. We're gonna go to the park. We're gonna do whatever they want to make a big deal just because we caught you reading, and this is why we're doing it. And there's another step that recently I started doing with my daughter, who's just 4, and that I learned from Andrew Huberman. You're probably familiar with him.
Yeah.
So he talked about this trick of residual memory visualization, right?
Mm.
Because we have two types of memory. We have the episodic memory and we have residual memory. Episodic memory,
Exotic
and
memory,
procedural
procedural
memory,
memory. Yeah.
procedural memory.
Mhm.
So procedural memory visualization is what I did with my daughter, which means like the procedural memory is like when you get into the car, how to start the car every step of the way, right? Your memory remembers. So what I did with her is I broke up a chocolate bar into many, many pieces, and I told her, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine yourself going, picking up a book and reading. And the more steps you tell me that you visualize, the more chocolate bars you earn, the more chocolate pieces you get for that. So she sat down, closed her eyes, and she basically did procedural memory visualization out loud with me. She told me how she's going to wake up, put on her clothes. She just did as many steps as possible to get as many chocolate pieces as she could possibly get out of me. And that's now something I'm going to start incorporating too. So those are the tricks that I've used from behavior design, neuroscience to get my kids hooked on reading. And right now, my son reads, not to exaggerate, but probably 2 to 3+ hours every single day.
Oh yeah. My kids,
Which
my kids, when they were younger, they had a lot more freedom, a lot more, just more time. They're starting to get into a lot of things, and they read for hours. Like in fact, actually had to make them stop reading over meals because they were just reading over their meals, and that was fine, like, for a while. And then I was like, we need to be more mindful about eating, and like, because it's like the equivalent to like, you're not supposed to sit and watch television while you're eating meals because you'll just overeat or whatever. And so I was like, we need to not be training. We need to be training like we're going to sit and like have a conversation as a family. And now my husband will read a book to them a lot at dinner. But then that's like a discussion. So we're having a conversation about it and it's a shared experience. But yeah, the kids they just love
my
reading.
son
And
reads during eating, and I don't stop him yet. Maybe I should. I may consider that.
you know what? The thing is that you have to know your own kids, right? You have to know what's right for your kids. These are my
Yes.
kids and how they interact with things. And you just have to decide what's best. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it if it's okay. My kids were just spending like an hour and a half eating. And I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. And so that's like, that was, a concern for us, but your kid might be eating in 15 minutes and it's fine.
What was
And
it?
it's the same, and books are completely different than getting lost in like a television show and that overstimulation. And I think what you're talking about with the stimulus and boredom is huge. I hesitate, sometimes people are like, how do you get your kids to read? And I'm like, we don't have a TV. Like, we don't own one of those. And so, they love reading, they love books, they're just super into all of those things. And it's a boredom thing. Like, that's where they get their stories, right? So I'm 100%,
So
I
when my
100%.
son was born, my wife made me get rid of my TVs back in the apartment in Manhattan. I gave them away, both TVs. In this country house, we have two big TVs in a game room, and but my kids are only allowed to watch specific type of shows. Like, for
Yeah,
instance, Shark Tank, they can watch. That's a show I encourage. It's an entrepreneurial show. It shows them what's possible. It gets them going, so they're
I love
allowed
that.
to watch. They're allowed to watch specific sports games because I encourage sports activities. So certain sports like the Super Bowl, we're all gonna watch. We're gonna be rooting for different teams. My son, I taught him that football, NFL, is like a chess using humans. So we're very much into chess, and I explained to him the rules of the game. So he loves the game from a chess perspective, looking for mismatches, trying to understand the coaches. He plays hockey himself. Doesn't like to watch hockey because it gets him all in rage, like he riled up right away going. But I
Well, I
wanted
mean,
to
that's
ask
the thing,
you,
right? You're teaching your family values. So my
yeah,
kid, we have the same sort of thing. We don't have a television per se, but we have a big monitor
iPad.
that's
Yeah.
hooked up to, well, no, it's mounted on the wall. Actually, the previous owners of the house did it. And so we just didn't, and actually we didn't want to take it down because if you took it down, it was going to be a pain to repair all the tile and stuff here. So we just left it there, like, oh, that's nice. And then at some point when we got rid of the TV, we're like, oh, we'll just hook this up to a computer, which is what we've done. And so we'll watch like documentaries and that kind of thing on there. And the kids get like a fun movie a week that like their choice. And I think
Yeah.
that's important. I think it's important that
Yeah.
kids, and I also would say that there's age appropriateness to all of this.
Of
There's
course.
what, like, giving, unfiltered amount of time to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old is totally different than a teenager. And a teenager needs to be starting to learn to flex those muscles of control, right? So, and then you're there to help them with it, and learning how to deal with addictive behaviors,
That's very important
and
these
really
days,
being
especially.
attached to all that, the dopamine that they're getting.
Yeah, the dopamine today, that's really dangerous, and especially with social media, all the tablets, all those screens. And I don't know if you read this week, they did a first implant into human of Neuralink.
Oh yeah, the Neuralinks. Yeah, so
Yeah.
as a neuroscientist, I find the Neuralink, so we've been doing that for a really long time. I think that people don't really recognize we've been implanting chips into people's brains for a really long time. Like in my realm, which is motor control, or movement, we've had chips in people's brains for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. We've been
Wow,
putting
I
them
didn't
in,
know that.
and I know I have colleagues that are doing that. It's different from what they're trying to do with Neuralink because they're trying to actually like integrate with the internet and whatnot. But it's not brand new. We've been doing it for a while. It's just the application of it is slightly different. And so I tend, I don't know, I'm probably odd, and my husband's probably odd on this. We have a tendency to, so for example, like ChatGPT. I think that ChatGPT is a game changer in some ways, but it's not, from my personal opinion, it's not going to change. You still need a human to sort through things. It's actually still a terrible writer. It still doesn't really know how to do a lot of things. Is it super helpful? Yeah, it's super helpful. Are students going to use it to write papers? Absolutely. And they should be using it that way. We need to be teaching them how to use it appropriately, though, because it's still a terrible writer. I've had it right, and I can tell it's obvious right away, if it's
Of course.
ChatGPT or the other.
Easy.
But I think that a lot of these technologies, I think everyone thinks it's going to replace people or it's going to do these things. It's no, it's going to help those people do their jobs differently, or create more content, and those sorts of things. So I
But
don't know.
but
And with
any
the
any
Neuralinks, it's different.
technology always did that. Any technology,
Exactly.
erased jobs, created other jobs. When
Absolutely.
tractors were, industrial revolution wiped out all the jobs in the field, but it created all the jobs making these devices and supporting them and
Absolutely.
maintaining them. Same thing's gonna happen here. However, I do think the general AI might change things dramatically. So when AI is actually capable of brainstorming and coming up with original ideas, which is years away, but we don't know how
We'll
long. We don't
see.
even know if it's possible, right? It's only a
Yeah,
theory
if you
thing.
can move into general intelligence,
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see that. Right now, and you know, I mean, it does come up with its original ideas if you give it, if you ask it for things. It's just that not all those ideas are created equal. Like it comes up, so like I'll use it for writing with different things, and I'll say, hey, you know, I want to do, or like teaching, right? I'll be like, hey, I want to do a lesson on this. Give me 10 ideas, and they'll give me 10 ideas, and most of them are terrible. And
Terrible.
then I'll be like, okay, give me 10 more ideas. Like, there's got to be something good in here. And or a lot of times it'll give you an idea. You're like, okay, that's almost right. Let me tweak it. But what it's not good at is figuring out what it doesn't know emotions. Like it can't. So like if I ask it to, like, we're talking about like X posting, right? Like there's, you know, like phrases that like mean something and create like, you know, emotion, and like, and a lot of times they're like, alliteration or the way it's said matters, and it can't do that. If I say, hey, write a snappy, or hey, write a pithy, or hey, write a, like, you know, it doesn't know how to do that. It can't create, it doesn't understand emotions, so it can't create that. And so I think that when you think about it in terms of like a classroom, or you think about like, so there's writing, but like I think mostly I think a lot about in education, it's like how you say something to a child matters. Being able to read their, where they are emotionally actually also matters. And also deciding, you know, like my kid, my oldest in particular, she struggles with things. And so it's like when it's time to give her gentle pushes and when it's time to pull back, like that's really hard. And an AI is going to have a really hard time doing those things. Is it going to be good at like teaching some basic concepts or being able to go back and forth with things? Yes. And I'm really looking forward to it being able to do that more readily. I think particularly is in the larger student classrooms, you know, at the university, I've got hundreds of students. And so I can't give them the kind of one-on-one attention. And a lot of the times they just have a question. Please explain this to me. Please explain it to me in a different way. Please make a video about this. You know, the only problem is that sometimes it lies. It doesn't know things.
It
So,
doesn't know a lot of things. It lies quite often. And also, it doesn't know the difference between good content and bad content.
it doesn't.
For instance, in marketing, there's like great marketers and there's just like a bunch of bullshit marketers that wrote the same
Yeah.
books. So how does
Yeah.
ChatGPT know which one? So I can ask it advice on marketing and it'll give me this blank list of things. And I know what great marketers said. So I'm like, that's actually bad advice, buddy. I would
Yeah.
not advise that to any entrepreneur because I
Well, and
know.
it can't replicate, like, so like if you say, I've actually tried this, I'll be like, hey, so look at so and so's X account. I want to write something on this. Like mimic them. Oh, you can't do that at all. It's terrible.
Have you
So
tried
bad
Grok yet?
because it's just trying to do with everything. And I'm just like, because I'm just like, oh, just play around with it. So I played around it a fair amount, particularly from the writing perspective, just kind of get a sense. But it's just not very good. But
Have you tried?
I think the thing that students are having trouble with is figuring out when to use it and when not to use it. Like I've actually told them, was like, do not send me stuff that you haven't sent to ChatGPT for grammar. I was like, it's great at that. It's great at doing grammar and spelling. And I was like, please don't send it to me unless these are complete sentences. Anyway,
Claire, have you played with Grok yet?
I haven't.
Oh, you
So do
should.
you
You
like it? Is it
should.
fun?
It is so much fun on the fun mode. So if you have premium,
That's
if
what I've
you,
heard.
oh my God, the fun mode, especially if you ask it to roast you based on your profile, it knows you so well. It'll roast you so well. I asked it to roast
Awesome.
me and I was reading it. It was a little painful because it's so true. It's so good at this. It was a little
Actually, I
painful.
should do that because I'm always looking for feedback, and like I've kind of cultivated like my audience is so nice, and I'm kind of like, hey, no, can you like give me some give me some constructive feedback, guys? And they're always
It'll
like, no,
do
this
it.
is great, and I'm like, I get it, I could do better though.
So if you just go to the Premium Plus membership, which
Yeah.
is like 17 bucks versus $8, right? You get access to Grok. And I like Grok more than ChatGPT. I use it way more now because, and Grok is being trained right now on real life data. It's Twitter data,
Yeah.
you
So
know. So
it's more
because
recent. Yeah.
not only that, I think data set is key in how smart the AI is, right? So here
Yeah.
it's learning to actually, because a lot of people that are very smart are now tweeting long form posts. So the
Right.
more content it gets, the smarter it becomes. And also, I believe in Elon, and I think Elon's going to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. He's got the best engineers at Twitter right now, and just everything he did at Twitter is just mind blowing to me. And everything he's doing is this dude
Yeah.
is on a different planet.
You don't short Elon stocks. They you don't bet against him. That seems to be true.
One of the things
Everything
that
he's
I've
done has been very successful. Not everything. I mean, nobody's bats 100, but he certainly has made a big impact on the world.
Well, his biggest knock on him is, given everything he's doing, he can be a great parent. He's not there. That's
Yeah.
personally how I look at it. Like, he just
Well, and I
sacrificed
think he's
that.
got 11 children or something. So I don't know how he manages that. I think that's
10
incredible.
children, one passed
10.
away when he was young, so he's got
Oh,
9 kids right now.
yeah.
Yeah, he had tragedy in his life. He experienced a young child died in his kind
So
of arms,
often,
sort
so
of thing.
often our great minds have had a lot of tragedy in their
He had
world.
a very traumatic childhood. His father is not a good person, and his mom is an amazing mother. Actually, one of my top 3 on my list of my best interviews I ever want to do is Maya Musk. I would love to interview her about how did she raise this guy.
Yeah.
How do people like that, especially the title of my podcast is Raising Game Changers. Well, when it comes to game changers, Elon is top of the food chain.
Yeah.
You
It's a great
know,
name of your podcast. I actually really like that.
thank you very much. Yeah, we
It's
went through a
really
number.
snappy, right to the point. It's good. Great at naming things. That's what
Marketer by trade.
I love that. Yeah, so that's one of my like I did not intend to get into this game. It was just kind of a way to find people, and then it kind of blew up, and so and now I have to think about marketing and like changing everything.
If you need any
But
advice, I'm here for you. I will
well,
give
that's
you.
awesome, Zach. I appreciate that. I
Yeah,
might
I've
take you up
been.
on that.
Please do. I've been doing it 20 years. I know what I'm doing.
That's
And
awesome.
always piece of advice to just have a long-term goal, long-term vision. That's probably where most people fall short. They think in very short increments of time, how do
Yeah,
I get this in 3 months? But if you set a 5-year goal and be ambitious, audacious with it, and then just try to,
and then move towards it.
move towards it, you'll get much further down the road than people who just don't have a real long-term vision. Time horizon is so important in business and in approach. And most importantly, be authentic. Authenticity is palpable, it sells, and people will find you. Like, you already have close to 10,000 followers. I think you are authentic, quite authentic on Twitter, and Twitter is going to grow exponentially, especially
Oh yeah.
as he adds more features to it. I think right now with the video content that he's creating, features to go live, and once the video library is going to be searchable like YouTube, is going to crush YouTube.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. That's the kind of that's the only complaint right now. I heard someone was talking about that you can't your content dies away real fast, and you need to
Exactly.
be able to for people to be like finding your stuff over and over again. It needs to like if there's been a popular post, like it needs to come back like when people are searching for it, obviously.
And that's what's going to
It's not
happen.
just
He's
going
going
to
to.
be super recency biased, but yeah. And but I'm sure I have confidence in it. Sometimes you have to be patient for things, but I think it's not there. I think for me it's figuring out what that vision is, because right like I just decided to resign, and that's
I
recent.
read that. Yeah.
And yeah, so and the main reason for that is to homeschool my kids. All of this is this is bonus. I really would like to be of value to people, and honestly to also learn and grow for my children. So I've gotten really into we started off very unschooling, and I would still say we are still mostly unschooling, with the exception of like 2 hours a day where we're classical homeschoolers. And I really do believe in and a lot of the classical stuff is the stuff you're talking about, right? It's the reading the great books, being part of the great conversation, exposing kids to the great art, the great architecture, the great literature, all the things. And but I like to do it from an unschooling perspective. It's like it's stuff that you create environment, just like you did with the books. I love that. I've been really wanting to, like, we have a reading room, but I've been thinking I really want to do one for the kids specifically. So you've inspired me. I'm gonna steal that. But I think the same thing with architecture and art and all of these things, like creating an environment in which it's amazing and exciting and you're really joyful in experiencing these things. We did a whole thing on Japan the other day, and we learned about we folded up our own origami, and we learned how NASA like uses origami to fold up satellites so they can get them into space. And we learned about these kinds of things, and so that's really accessible, and kids think it's really cool. And we watched a video of this sunshade that they had made, and we watched it like unwrap in space, and they're all just like it's just they're so excited. So it's this I think that feeling of just pure joy when you're learning things.
And full immersion is going to come much
Full
easier. Like,
immersion.
when we used to live in New York City, one of the huge benefits, of course, there was museums everywhere. We had an
Yeah.
annual membership to the
Yes.
Met. My son would be at the Met at least once a week, sometimes 2, 3 times a week, because we lived on the Upper West Side, right across from the park was the Met. Now we live in Connecticut. There's nothing here, but VR is coming around. and VR is going to enable us to take amazing tours worldwide. If you want to see, what Leonardo da Vinci did, or what any of the great artists, the painters, you can just actually be completely immersed
Well, and
and
they're
experience
really
that.
beautiful videos. Like when we did ancient Greece, like we did a tour of the Parthenon, we did Rome, we went like it was like a whole hour-long video of like we went through the Colosseum, and I've been to the Colosseum in person, and I was like, this was actually better, like in terms of like content. Now there's something very different. Like sometimes you have to go and be in a space, or
Yeah.
like I still think we did Bernini this week. I posted about that on my blog, but we did Bernini because last week, and you watch the video, and I'm like the kids kind of get the idea. They're like, oh wow, it looks like it's soft, like you could like see them. And I was like, yeah, but there's just something different about standing in front of it, like, and to have the physical presence of some of these things. But I so I 100% agree. There's never been a better time to be doing these kinds of things, exposing kids to these kinds of things, because the online world is so rich. And so, yes, I absolutely want to take my kids and see a lot of these things in person. And I hope we'll get to New York. I've personally never been to New York. I lived in Chicago for a long time, but I never got to New York.
It's
So I
something
don't know.
spectacular. When you see,
Yeah.
like first time I got to New York City, I just was mind blown. I look at all the structures and all these buildings, and couldn't understand the grandiosity of human mind and what people think of and they build it. But I wanted to ask you this, because you're making a lot of sacrifice to homeschool your kids, and so have I. For instance, I've sold my businesses at a huge discount in order to be able to homeschool, and my son was going to one of the best private schools in America when we used to live in New York City. And when COVID happened, it was a blessing in disguise, because I got him to the best school. He was going to the K level at first, and they sold me on everything is about growth mindset during the interviews. And I was like, awesome, this is what I'm on about. I love it. Go to basis. He got in, he went to basis, and then COVID hit and everything froze. And I got to analyze basis, and I'm like, wait, guys, we're talking about growth mindset, but you're still rewarding for knowing the right answers, not for individual effort and progress. So what are we talking about? It's one thing to preach it to me and sell it to me, and of course, it
Show
was
me
my
how you're
fault.
quantifying it. Yeah.
It was my fault as a parent not to research deeper into this. Just assume you know what you're talking about because you're using all the right terminology. But when I looked at the way you educate, you have no idea what growth mindset apparently is, because you're still grading based on knowing the right answers, right? So that goes against the whole idea, grain of growth mindset and personal growth versus benchmarked growth. So that was, we decided with my wife later on, like, to pull them out of school and do it ourselves. And it's a huge sacrifice because it's not easy. Kids are at home all the time. They will annoy the hell out of me sometimes. As much as I love them, sometimes they'll get under my skin.
You still
you
need
know
your own time. Yeah.
I need my own time, so meditation helps a lot with that now. And exercise, and sometimes just, locking myself in the office, leave me alone type of thing helps a lot. But what led you to, as an educated professor of neuroscience, you actually chose, we all product of education. I went to school too. I was
Yeah.
one of the best students in my class. I'm a college dropout though. That's a little different. I dropped out of college, even though I got a full scholarship when I was going to Pace, but I still dropped out because I was working at Goldman at the time, and
Some
working
of
at
our best
Goldman.
minds are dropouts. It seems to be like a badge of honor.
Well, I was working at Goldman, and I was making about 5 times what the graduates used to make, and I was thinking,
Yep.
like, what am I doing there? I'm already making that much money, way more money than if I graduated. Plus, there was a moment at Goldman where one of my mentors called me to the room and said, I want you to see this. They hired about 7 or 8 people from Wharton and all the top business schools, and I was going to undergrad. And literally what he told them was this: everything you've learned in school, I want you to
Right.
forget it. It's all
Yeah.
nonsense. It's just
Right.
how we measure your ability to study.
Yes.
And at this moment, I was
Yes.
sitting there like, and literally, I got to finish work and go to night school right now after this speech. So that was kind of key moment for me to drop out. But you chose homeschooling, and I really wanted to ask you about, like, what led you to this.
Well, we are COVID homeschoolers, so it was not on my radar. It's not something I thought about. It's not something I knew anything about. I will tell you that we were barely holding it together as a family. My kids, so they were 5 and 3 when COVID happened. We were struggling. My oldest was really struggling in many ways, but the whole family was struggling. Like we were just barely keeping it together. COVID happened. The kids came home from school, and life had never been better. And the biggest change, that was one of those things that just opened my mind so much, was that my oldest, who was having tantrums and just being really miserable and unhappy, all of a sudden was like a different child. like 2 weeks in, I remember, and it was 2 weeks, it was like weeks. And I turned to my husband, I was like, when was the last time that she threw a tantrum? He's like, I don't know, she did that this week. And I was like, huh, well, that's new. And then it was, very shortly after that, I was like, I think it was just school. I think it
Yeah.
was just that she was at school all the time. And so it's one of those things, like once your eyes have been opened, you just can't close them again. And so that led us down. And the other thing was is that I had never been happier. I was like, this is great. I love being with my kids. I have missed being with my kids. And, I've since learned a lot. There's a woman called Erica Komisar who talks a lot about how important it is for mothers and attachment and all of these things, particularly when they're young. And you're talking about neuroscience, like how it builds the brain, how it changes the way children deal with fear and anxiety and all of these things. And also how women have to basically shut all of that down in order to like leave their crying children at daycare. And I was like, yeah, I went through all of that. I feel traumatized by it. And I am so grateful to spend this time with my kids. And I was like, we were not, and then that led me to homeschooling. And I was like, well, let's get into homeschooling. And then I just like powered through, just was into all of it. Listened to all the podcasts, read all the books. It was just like like that summer of 2020. And I was, we were seriously playing around with it. We were, I don't count that as a homeschooling year because we were still just trying to figure out what we were doing. We were kind of surviving. But then I put the kids back into school in August of 2020. And I remember my husband asked me, I was going to turn 40. And he said, what do you want for your 40th birthday? And I said, I want to homeschool my kids. I can't do this. And so we pulled them out in November and we didn't put them back. And then I count January 2021 as our first official homeschool year. And it worked for a while, me working full time. And I tried to meet people online who were doing that. It was a lot of why I was online talking to people. And but by that point, it wasn't just about like the emotional growth. It was also about like you're talking about growth mindset. It was talking about like being able to unschool them. It was just letting them just love learning. And I'm so glad that I had gone down the unschooling rabbit hole before I got serious about homeschooling. And so it was about just like love the things that are in your world, put beautiful things in their path, all of that kind of stuff. And so I was into all of it. I was like, this is the way, this is our life. This is what we want to do. And then and then the truth was that I just couldn't, I was spending, when I was at work, I was thinking about home. When I was at home, I was thinking about work. And that's what people talk about. But I was like, I got to the place where I was like, I will not regret leaving this job. I'm going to regret if my kids don't end up where they're supposed to. I'm going to regret not giving it my all, giving it everything I had. Not to mention that me and the university weren't getting along as well. So I think that the way the university has gone in terms of education is just, it's not where I wanted to be. And I don't think, I talk about this a fair amount. I haven't recently, but I'm a university professor and I don't know if I'll send my kids to college. And when I talk to my kids about college, it's like, well, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a doctor, okay, well, we'll talk. And also I'll try to convince you to be an Ayurvedic doctor or a naturopath. But if you, there's certain things you're going to have to go to school for, but there's a lot of things you don't, and just increasing.
I think that's going to change so much in the future.
It is. I just don't know what the world's going to look like. And so I really don't feel like the university was not into strong pedagogy. It was increasingly a business model. It's increasingly about get the maximum number of students through. We don't really care if they're really even doing that well. My university is doing a big online program, which I think is the right play. And I actually think that they're doing a really good job. I think they're doing a really good job in the online programs that they are creating, but so if you think about like Bloom's taxonomy, I don't know if you know Bloom's taxonomy, but basically the bottom is like, remember things and understand things. And then it moves up to analyze things. And I can't remember the other one, compare and contrast things. I can't remember exactly all the titles, but the top one is create new ideas. And so the idea is that, you have to know some basics, but the idea is to be able to use your brain and think and debate and discuss and then create brand new ideas. Right. And the university, that used to be what the university was, that you were up here, like, K through 12 was like, you remember, you understand, you can speak, you can read, you can do these things, but like now let's create new ideas. And I feel like at least within the classroom in the universities, it's all about the bottom blooms. It's not about creating new ideas. It's not even about discussing ideas. Um, you can't have certain ideas. You have to do all of these kinds of things. And I just felt like um, I'm just moving farther and farther away from that. And it's not the model that it's deeply upsetting to me.
I
um,
understand.
what's happened, and also what's happened to science.
It's
People
deeply
that are
upsetting
saying
to
they're
me
doing science,
too.
they're not doing
But
science. It's not science what they're
but
doing.
but but I see good signs on the horizon. For instance, I'll give you an idea.
There
Like
is.
right now, you can learn from the best professors in the world. They're professing online. Andrew Huberman, Jordan Peterson just launched the Peterson Academy, where they have classes. I think it's $30 a month, and you have classes on everything, including etiquette, including how to dress properly. Like that's phenomenal stuff. Learning from like, why would I send my kid to a college where he would be learning from the average professor, where he can learn from the best professors in the world,
Right.
from the brightest minds? And as VR comes around, it becomes fully immersive, and our brains can't tell the difference from reality and virtual reality. It's been already done many tests on that. They're going to be fully immersed in the room with Jordan Peterson. So why would I send them to a school? The only thing they're going to miss out on the school is the connections they will make, right? But we can
But the
actually,
internet, you can make so many connections. Like that's
yeah, we
that's
can figure
that
out
there's no
ways to
selling
actually
point for that anymore. Like, I mean,
anymore. No.
and working, if you work jobs, right? So like if you start a job in, your teenage years, and then, you move up and move up and move up, like then that's how you build your network. Instead, you're in college and all you know is people that are your own age. The network that you need are people who are older than you, the people that have made, done a better
Well,
job and
one
who
of
are
the
already out there in the
best
real world.
one of the best arguments I've heard from a guy named Alex Harmozy online. Is one of the greatest marketed businessmen that I've learned from lately. And he said this phrase that really stuck with me. He goes like, if you're a kid about to go to college, for instance, here's two scenarios. You can go to college, or you can pick up a business idea and start building that, right? So what's going to happen is, and pick up a job at the same time. You're going to be learning and reinvesting your money that you're doing into your own thing. What's going to happen in 4 years, the guy that went to college is going to be here and you're going to be over here. Because
Yep.
throughout that experience, you're going to learn so much more. You're going to build connections. You're going to pay mentors. You're going to go to real events with real people. You're going to make all these connections. So all the money you're going to be making in the job, reinvest into your own learning, and you're going to be way further down the line than if you just went to college. Because in college, they don't teach you anything real anymore. Maybe they used to back in the day, but today, when I look at what they're teaching, and not about
It's this model that, you have to get everyone through.
yeah.
And I think that I do think that if you're going to offer something, you need to give it the good old college try. That you need to do your best to be able to make it for everyone. But we also need to have conversations with kids and students about, is this actually where you want to be? Is this what you really want to do? Because there's a lot of the students who are struggling. It's because they don't want to be there. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want to do it, because that's, like I do special interventions for the students who are really struggling in my classrooms, and most of the time those students, they don't belong there. And it's not because they don't belong there intellectually. It's because they don't belong there because they don't want to be there, or they're struggling with some really big issues that they need to take care of before they're in college. And there's the students that are really struggling, but it's I don't know. I think that the world is innovating, and I want my children to be critical thinkers. I want them pushing ideas. I want them to be just doing more than what the university currently offers. Now, that being said, there are universities that are doing awesome things, like the St. John's College. They basically have everyone just read these ancient texts and just sit around discussing things all the time. Whether or not, that's the ideal situation, I think you're learning something from that. I do know that there's a new college in Austin. I think they're calling themselves
University,
University
that's
of
right.
Austin. And they're
Yes.
doing something similar, where you're doing like the first 2 years, you're basically learning how to think. And then the last 2 years, you're starting your own business. Or it doesn't have to be starting your own business. I think that it had to be like a new idea or something. And I think, and then there's also this company called Praxis. I don't know if you've heard of them, but their whole thing is you just actually their kick was that they wanted to lots of companies will say 4-year degree or equivalent work experience. And so they interviewed a bunch of companies and he says, what is equivalent work experience? And they were like 6 months on the job, but they're like, well, we can do that. Like, so they do 6 months of kind of job training, which is basically like, how do you write emails? How do you promote yourself? How do you do like basic etiquette stuff that you have to be able to do? How do you say the lingo? How do you talk and then learn about the company or whatever you're interested in, and then you do a 6 months on the job training, and you get paid to do it. And then you don't have to pay back the program unless you're making $50,000 a year or something. So like they've got skin in the game, and it's just a really great entrepreneur program. But then you're the cohort, and I think having a cohort of people who are trying to do something big, even if it's not in the same field, is really important. So I
Well,
just think that
that's the great news on the horizon.
there's
Yeah,
just miraculous things happening in education,
yeah,
and I'm really excited to see them. And
me too.
it is a sacrifice. It was really, 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 really hard to give up something that I've been doing for 20 years. But my children are worth it.
Well, on the topic of that, I just want to mention that yes, University of Austin, by the way, it's launched by an amazing entrepreneur and the people around them,
Mm.
and they just announced this year they're starting with 100 students, and
Yep.
then they're going to grow it into more and more. And Elon just filed. There's going to be an
He's,
Elon University
I
also
heard
in
that too.
Austin, Texas. So, and I think
Maybe we
more
gotta
and
move
more
to
of that's
Texas.
going to come on. I'm not sure about that. Not sure about Texas. Love some Texans, but not sure about moving there. But what I want to say is, I think entrepreneurial journey is key for kids because the of two aspects, right? So aspect one is entrepreneurship is always very difficult. So you're constantly learning to treat failure as feedback, and you get hardened in the process. You become resilient, which I
Yes.
think, and also you learn to adapt on the fly, which I think in the future is going to be very, very important because things are going to be changing so fast in the future that learning to learn and apply it immediately is going to be very, very important.
Yes. Learning to
And
think. Yeah.
second is you pick up some amazing skills, in the entrepreneurial journey. You become a great marketer, which is about persuasion, influence, storytelling,
Skill
you know.
stacking. Yep.
So you pick up a whole host of skills, micro skills, major skills that are going to be vital in the future, which future economy, our kids are going to have to compete worldwide. The economy is not going to be local to United States anymore. They're going to be competing on the global market. And what
Right.
I know from my friends in China, in Russia, and in Latin America is that those countries are moving very aggressively with their educational programs. And
Yep.
we're falling way behind.
We are.
It's one of the reasons why we chose unschooling and doing it ourselves, because we're like, this is not going to get them prepared to compete with those products. Those guys are going to be way ahead of us. And I don't want my kids to be, on the bottom and bottom shelf getting UBI in order to pay their bills. It's not going to happen
And,
to my kids.
and it's interesting. So I think so often the conversation is about pulling the kids out of like public schools, but we also had our kids in a really nice, I know you said you had them in a really great, the basis, like private school. We had our kids in private school and in Montessori school, and they were very traditional Montessori and they growth mindset and stuff, but it mattered so much. They had a new teacher, and the new teacher just didn't really understand the principles, really wasn't on board. And so it's so much about who are you letting raise your children,
Yes.
who are you letting, and it's about your individual family values too. Like our family, I think we share a lot of values, but I suspect that there's slight differences between your family and my family, and that's okay. But but who's getting to decide those, like the values that are getting passed on to our children is us, right? When you're reading to your children, like the things that I pick up on are different than maybe what you pick up on or what another parent might pick up on. But it's like I have conversations with my kids about, well, is that the way we should talk to people? Or even like you're talking about entrepreneurship, it's like we're reading a book, and they're it's called The Treasure Seekers, and they're trying to make money, and they're these kids, so I don't really know what they're doing, but they go down some bad paths. And we talk about, like, is that a good decision? Do you think they should really make money that way? And some of them are not moral ways to make money, and then there's other ways. They try to make this newspaper, and it's actually super cute because they're really terrible at it, so it's really funny. But then we can have a conversation. Well,
Right.
do you think that would work? Why or why not? Would it be okay that it's funny? What if they were doing it on purpose? And so what would people get excited about stuff? So you can have these kind of conversations with kids, and that a teacher doesn't have time. You don't have time to do that, right? You don't have time to spend this one-on-one time with your kids, and then to show them exactly like whatever they're really into, like letting them. That's one of the things I love most about the unschooling mindset is this: explore their passions,
Yeah.
and just let them go deep. And so one of the big things, one of my favorite podcasts, it's called Living Joyfully, but she has a podcast on there where she interviews adults who were unschooled. And because that was a big thing for me, I was like, I need to know how these kids turn out. And I was like, what happens to these kids? And one of my favorite stories is she interviewed this woman, and when she was younger, wanted to be a vet. She's like, I want to be a vet. This is what I want to do for life. This is me. And so her parents like they moved out to the country and they let her shadow like in middle school, this like big animal vet. And they did this, they got all these animals, this whole long thing. And about a year into it, she turns to her mom and she's like, I don't want to be a vet. And she's like, what happened? And she's like, well, I thought it would be taking care of animals, and it is, but it's taking care of sick animals. And you spend most of your time kind of, helping some animals get better, but a lot of animals don't. And so she got to know when she was like 12 that she didn't want to be an animal vet, right? And I said, if she didn't get to try that out when she was in middle school, she would have gone on, she would have gotten her college degree, she would have gotten her veterinary degree, and then she'd be 25 or 30 and being like, shoot, I don't want to be a vet.
That's what happened to my friend. My
So,
friend's
right?
wife, she spent 12 years studying to be a brain surgeon,
And then
and
hated
she
it.
and hated it, and she had to retool herself to become some kind of different doctor. But
Yeah.
she was one of the best students and to be a brain surgeon, and it takes 12 years after
Oh yeah,
after
it's really
school.
long. I have some
12
brain surgeon
years.
friends.
So
It's really
it
hard.
was devastation in the family when she first tried it, and she hated it.
Hated it.
And a year later, she's like, I can't do this no more.
Yeah.
And she
But
was a
that
prodigy.
woman, she got to really retool what she was going to do, and she started interning at a business when she was like 15 or 16, I can't remember which. And so then she ended up starting her own business. I think when she was 18. So the interview was like she was like 27 or 28. So she basically had her own business for 10 years. And she had a couple of kids, and I was like, she's 28 and she was like running her own business. And she would have been a vet, like if she had been in the regular system. So I think it's so great that, and our children need to have this flexibility to explore all the things and go down the rabbit holes of those things and be like, is this really what I want to do?
On the
Um,
topic of passion, I think the best definition for passion I heard from Naval Ravikant. He said, what feels like play to you, but work for others. So
yes.
that's passion. And I thought that was the best definition I ever heard. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to send you our books because we published our own book for kidpreneurs. Because
Oh, awesome.
your kids are now basically what, 9 and 6?
9 and 7.
Nine and
You
seven.
just
So
turned
it's
7, so you're,
perfect
yeah.
age for this book. We had to write it because when our son became an entrepreneur at 6 years old, he gave this idea because it was COVID shutdown, and he heard me talking. He heard me giving an excuse to my wife why I didn't buy her flowers, which was the flower shops are closed. So he had this bulb idea. Whoa, flower shops are closed. Can't buy flowers. We got plenty of flowers in our backyard, so I don't want to sell those. So he started selling them. We supported them. And then the summer came around, so lemonade stand, here we go. And then during COVID beginning, we didn't know, this whole story about transmitting on surfaces. And
Yeah.
everybody wanted to wash their hands more often. So we were supporting him. So we decided to do frameworks with him and show them how you go from problem ideation to solution. So if you go in this framework, he came up with a solution of, I think I have it somewhere over there. There's a soap with a little toy inside for kids. To get to the toy, you got to wash your hands more often.
Oh, I
So,
love it. That's so adorable. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So he would make those soaps. We helped him make them, and he would sell them. And he was doing it phenomenally. He made thousands of dollars selling soaps. And so, we bought every book there is for kidpreneurs, and they all sucked. They're all so outdated. So I'm like, babe, I'm just gonna we do it ourselves, just like
Gotta make
everything
it.
else we're doing. So we published our book. It actually won from Creative Child Magazine, dubbed the Book of the Year in 2021. And
Congratulations. That's
yeah,
amazing.
thank
And then
you.
he wrote it
And
too, right? So it's like on his
he
resume
helped
as
us
well.
because what happened is the first version that I wrote the way I write, not for kids. I just wrote what I thought was important. My wife looked at it. She goes like, you think kids are going to understand this? Are you out of your mind? You wrote for adults, kids stuff. I'm like, really? So she's like, let me write chapter 1. So she wrote it in kid-friendly language. And we called our son and I asked him, Sky, can you please read both of these chapters and tell me which one you like more? Because I like mine way more. He read hers. He goes like, okay. He read mine. He goes like that. I have no idea what this one even says. I'm like, oh boy, okay. So we had to rewrite the whole book from scratch. My wife rewrote it for me we didn't have
Sounds like a
ChatGPT back
beautiful
then.
team. What a wonderful family you have.
So we've been working with kids ever since. We launched a mentorship program for kids, and they came up with the kids, that's one of the things I love about them is they're unrestricted in their thinking. They come up with solutions that I wouldn't even think of to problems that we have. They're just so creative. And we don't box them in the schools. The things they think of, I'm sitting there sometimes listening to them brainstorm. We're like, where did you get this from? It's just so out of
Their
this
minds are
world.
unencumbered. Yeah.
And
And it's
that's
not just
what
about school. Like so many of our great ideas come from young people. They just think completely outside of the box. I love it.
There's this one problem, like for instance, there's 4 kids. They launched 4 different businesses around the same problem, plastic in the ocean, right? So one of the kids, he was young at the time, Alex Greven. He just went the awareness route. He published a little book. He did a little movie about this. Another kid, Boyan Slat, comes from a very educated family. So he's the guy behind the ocean cleanup. Right now, there's gigantic rigs in the ocean cleaning up plastic. Another kid, he went on to Shark Tank and he went the chemical route. So he created dissolvable containers so that now he partnered with Mark Cuban on Shark Tank. Now all the hotel chains, all their single-use shampoo bottles are dissolvable. So it just breaks down.
Very
You know,
nice.
so yeah, and there's another kid his name is Easton Dana. So he started it's what called canned goods clothing. So instead of ordering your goods in plastics, you order in collectible cans, which are also biodegradable. And he also spends 10% of the proceeds in order to invest into ocean cleanups. So 4 different kids solve the problem that all the adults are trying to figure out, and they went completely different route on how to do that.
That's magic. I love that.
And that's where this is why I think entrepreneurship is key for them, because when we interviewed Alex Green, we interviewed Easton Dana, and I'm hoping to interview Boyan Slat one day, and Benjamin Stern, the other kid. But when we spoke to these two, the struggles they went through in the iteration to become a successful entrepreneur, that's really the magic. And they both say the same thing, like those struggling days were kind of the magical days, where you fail and you can't figure it out and you get desperate and then you finally come to this solution that works. And that moment, that aha moment, that solution that works is like, this is the juice. This is what worth living for,
I was just listening to a podcast with Tim Ferriss, and he was also kind of reminiscing about the early days.
I love Tim Ferriss.
And what Tim Ferriss, so you would
I said I love Tim Ferriss.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry. You got Tools for Titans on your shelf. Yeah. So I thought you were like, I don't know. I was like, you've got a book on there.
I got all of his books, all 5.
You're awesome. But he was reminiscing about the good old days, and he was also saying, he's like, I probably forgot all the hard times, but there is something special about the beginning, and I think that I just love being there for the beginning for my kids, like watching them become the people they're going to be, and creating environments in which that's a good place for them to happen. So it's awesome.
I'm sure you've thought about it. So how are you going to approach social media education for them? Because I have a certain take that's it's kind of controversial. I'll tell you after you tell me yours.
I'll be interested to see what you say.
Okay.
First, I have to decide on what age we're going to let them even be on socials. It's going to be much older, probably past middle school. Middle school is actually, the studies show that, so I have girls, studies show that the bullying and all of that stuff is the highest in middle school for girls. And they're the most susceptible to some things like that. So I might help them start some things, but we're going to do for now, they're not going to allow to do their faces, and they're not going to be allowed to use their names until they are at an age at which we can help monitor them to do some of those things. But I also think with AI, they're going to be able to create their own personas, or you can use AI to real time modify certain features so you're not recognizable in public. I forget who talks about it, but they're always like, would you rather be rich or famous? And the answer is rich, not famous. Like, because you don't want everyone to know who you are. You want to be able to walk down the street and still have anonymity. But so I think I want them to be able to use social media in ways to form connections, but it should be a business adventure. It's not just about here's who I am. It's okay, what are you selling? And it might take you a while to figure out what you're selling, and that's okay. But you're not going to use it as just here I am, I'm doing these things, right? Unless those things are useful to people. How can you be of value? And the whole point of social media is to be of value to others. And it shouldn't be, so anyway, that's
this is my approach to it. So one of my mentors years ago said this about social media, and by the way, then if you watch the movie Social Dilemma, they're validated, right? So what he said is this: it's a pay to play system. If you're not paying to play, you're the product, right? So you can pay in 2 ways. You can pay monetarily or with your time and creating content. But if you're not doing one of those 2 things, you are the product. And then the Social Dilemma, he kind of stated, unless you're paying for something, you're the product, very simply. So the way I approach it is, to me, the analogy I use is sex education, because we know that abstinence doesn't work. But sex education does work. Teaching people about condoms works, right? So the same approach is here. The way we do it is we teach my own son now to create content, promote your business. We put a middle layer in between. So for us, it's us, the parents. For our mentees, we hire VA out of Philippines that does the posting for them. So they're pay-to-play players. They create content to promote their brands. So basically, we educate them to leverage the system, take advantage of the system, but not be a mindless scroller. Right. And now what happened is even my son's consumption of content is all tied to what he wants to create content on.
Absolutely.
So there's this phenomenal paradigm shift when you become a creator of content, and now you're not a mindless consumer of it, you're rather a researcher, and this is what I believe is how social media should be taught to kids. Create content and be a mindful participant of this ecosystem, because it's not going away. Because unless you do that, you'll become a victim to it, because you're still going to be on it, but you're going to be a mindless scroller, doom scroller, and you're going to be privy to these emotional triggers, because unfortunately fear sells, and this is what you're going to be all consuming, is stuff that triggers you.
Yeah, that's the other, 100%. I think that's awesome. In fact, I'm like literally being like, so when I think about something that I want to hold on to, like I think about composing a tweet about it, like a post about it, and I'm like, ooh, I have to figure out how to like Zach Story gave you this. So I also think a little bit about, I lost my train of thought, but
we're talking about social media paradigm shift from consumer to creator.
Oh yeah, no, the persona. Yeah. So one of the things you were talking about, I'm gonna loop us back to the beginning. You were talking about behaviorals, and I think that you can post things that are mean or sassy or like aggressive, and you can build a really big following. But one of the things I think is really important is who you are online is who you become in real life. And I like, you talk about being authentic. Yes, absolutely. Ideally, you're being authentic. But if you are becoming something that gets a lot of likes, but gets them for the wrong reasons, then you become that. And so I think that when I talk to my kids, it's going to be like, who is it that you're going to be? Are you going to get, you have to have an alternative. You have to have something that's an alternative vision. You have to have something that's punchy, something that grabs people. But when we talk about who they're going to be online, making sure that they're putting out things that is true to who they are and not just for this external validation. I think that's, I'd add that
very important.
It's a behavioral piece, right?
It's a very important piece, because this external validation actually is very corrosive and corrupting. And I've seen a lot of people go down that rabbit hole. They have a lot of followers. I don't. And I actually lose a lot of followers sometimes because I would say my opinion about vaccines.
Because you're authentic, yeah.
And I'll just see like 50 people out.
They don't like that.
Immediately. No. And I'm still going to speak my mind, especially after I read RFK's Jr. book, The Real Anthony Fauci. Just so much disappointment in the medical community that I have. It is mind-boggling to me. But now, again,
I mentioned that my disappointment in what's happened to science.
But there's phenomenal news on the horizon. I'm going to share a podcast with you. I sent it to all my friends. I sent it to all my I made my parents watch it, and I even translated most of it to my mom, because I think it's that important. And it's an episode with Gary Brecka on Joe Rogan's, where he actually explains, like, for instance, an origins of ADHD is nothing to do with, I want you to watch it. I don't want to butcher it. It's all about nutrition. Okay. Yeah, because 44% of people do not break down folic acid, and that's just science.
But I can tell a whole folic acid story with pregnancy.
And we have folic acid in everything. Look at all the breads we buy. It's all enriched and fortified.
But it's not. It's folate in food.
Yeah,
So can I tell you my folic acid story?
Please.
So when I was a postdoc, so that's what you do after you get your doctorate, you kind of keep doing research. I had a friend, and so and she had just had a child who happened to have autism, and we went to this talk, and it was a study in rats, but they were basically saying they were studying the influence of giving like overdosing folic acid, which is what we do to moms, pregnant moms, and they were saying that the rats were showing these autistic behaviors, and she broke down in tears. And she's like, my family has a history of neural tube defects, which means that they didn't just overdose her with the regular amount of folic acid, they like tripled it. And she's like, I will always wonder now is if that is why my son has autism. And it was a rat study, and we talked about, you don't really know. but it completely changed. So when I was pregnant, I refused to take the prenatal vitamins. I knew that I needed folate because that was important. So I made sure that I had enough folate with food, and I also supplemented a little bit with folate, which is completely different. And then when I was pregnant with my second, the study came out in humans that it was linked. They can't say causal. They're just saying it's associated. Like the amount of folic acid that women are taking is associated with these autistic rates. And I think autism is there's no one cause of what's happening with that. It's a very nuanced, very big question. And RFK Jr. will talk about that. He talks about like, well, there's these 18 different things, and therefore it's most likely in these categories. And I think he has a really good nuanced take on that. In any case, there's just so much of like that's with everything. And so our big thing in our life, and that's why I say heavy mom, is, it has to be as close as we can to what we were supposed to be doing.
Exactly.
We
Naturally.
evolved to do.
Yes.
Evolution doesn't happen in decades.
Yes.
Like evolution doesn't happen in 1,000 years. It happens in tens of thousands of years. And I forget who said it. I think it might have been Brett Weinstein, but he said something like evolution didn't skip you.
Yeah.
And so you have to be honest to what your biology is prepared to
and
do.
Brett Weinstein is another amazing guy that I love learning from. He's just so and the way he breaks complex ideas down, I love learning from him and his
He
wife.
made me feel a lot less crazy because the conversations that he and his wife were having were the conversations that my husband and I were having during COVID. Yeah. And we just felt like crazy people because everyone else was just completely consumed by just what the news was telling them. And we were like, okay, well,
I was an outcast.
I read the papers. Like people were like, and then I have so many people like, oh, let's trust the science. Like, but did you read the paper? I read the paper, and we sat at home trying to replicate the data from the paper. And we're like, like, I don't, so it's tricky.
It's very tricky. And I don't want to insult people, but at the same time, like talking to people, even during already summer of 2020, we knew if you're outside and it's sunny, it breaks down the virus. There's no risk. And they were like, please, can you put your mask on? I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. We're outside, guys. Like, do we have to, and then masking the kids? That completely triggered me. I was very upset about that. And then vaccinating kids against COVID. I'm like, we already know they're not at risk. Then what are we doing here? And the absence of studies on vaccine safety is what really triggered me. I'm like, and I know the reason we don't study it because we don't want to find out. Like, that's the only plausible explanation. And then there was this guy, Jay Abrahamson, I think is his name. He explained on Joe Rogan's that all the studies that are done by Big Pharma, right? And the FDA doesn't have access to the raw data. What they get access to is the Big Pharma's analysis of the study. That's how Vioxx happened. That's how they killed tens of thousands of people on Vioxx. And by the way, FDA never even banned Vioxx. The Merck pulled Vioxx out of it before huge liability when they were filed with a lawsuit. So, and then of course, there's this phenomenal documentary on Netflix. It's called Painkiller. It's about the opioid epidemic that we had and how the FDA gets corrupted by this big pharma guys. And even the guy that was trying to fight it eventually got corrupted. And that's why we had the opioid epidemic.
All I can hope is that there's enough people and enough scientists that are, and I do think that there are some that are coming around. I actually recently found out that there was someone who I had a lot of respect for in my world that was kind of going through the same thing, like a colleague who was going through the same thing that I was, but we both felt completely isolated because we thought everyone else disagreed with everything. And so, it's finding the right people and finding your tribe. And I hope the science will come back and like real science.
Well, Elon,
it's one of the reasons I'm having my kids read all like these ancient scientists, because it's like, that's the way, this is how it was done. Like you observe things and you study things, and then you thought about, I just read, so we went to the Galapagos recently. And so I was reading Origin of the Species, which is Charles Darwin's work. And the culmination, it wasn't just him, but in any case, the way he talks is the way like scientists used to talk. He was like, well, I'm not 100% sure. He says it really nice, but he basically is saying, I'm not 100% sure if these are my ideas. Maybe other people have different ideas. And then he has these like incredible, like whole chapters on other people's ideas that disagree with him. Right. He's like, well, these people, and this is why. He lays their arguments out really nicely. And he's like, and this is why I disagree. But you're going to have to make your own decisions. And I'm like, this is science. This is the way it's supposed to work. And it's so beautiful the way it used to be. And I grew up in a system that was like that. It's just not like that anymore. Like I used to go to these conferences, and they would like get up and yell at each other. Like they were like, they completely, and then after they were done yelling at each other, they'd be like, okay, let's go get a beer.
Yeah.
But the idea was that you still, you could be friends and disagree with each other. And that not only that you could do that, but that was what you were supposed to do.
Yes.
Um,
Universities used to be all about debate and disagreement. That
yes.
was cultivated in universities.
Yeah.
Debate classes, debate teams we had back in the day. And now debate is forbidden. You can't disagree. Like the whole scientific method is about disagreement.
Yes. Well, one of
You
my
know?
first conferences I went to as a student, it was actually terrifying to me, but there was a gentleman who he was like one of these eminent scholars, but he had had a stroke fairly recently, so he was not his full self. And but they did a whole symposium to honor him. And so he got up and they had to help him out of his wheelchair. And then the people in the audience, like they would ask questions of him, and they would just like aggressively, angrily yell at him. And I was just like, and I had to give a talk later, and I'm like, I can't handle this. My professor, my advisor, he was like, no, this is them honoring him. This is him. They know that he would not want them to treat him any different. And this is the way they're respecting him by doing this. And he said, and they would never do that to you because you're a trainee and they know that. So, but the idea that you would regulate, like there's a difference between, your colleague or someone that you're working with versus, you build people up, but they still would ask you hard questions, and they still would push you. And that was important. And I think, and it used to be that way, and it's gotten so far away from that. And I think hope it come back. I'm certainly teaching it to my kids. I'm like, disagree with me if you don't, like we teach them, it's like, if I say something, my kid will get upset. I'm like, well, why aren't you, all right, like come up with a different solution. Like, what is it that you want to do instead? And we like, tell me, and then demonstrate to me why you think that's a better idea than what mama has suggested. Right. I was like, I want that pushback, and we're going to encourage it more as they get older.
Yeah. Well, we have
but
this.
You still have to brush your teeth. That one I'm not.
We have that system.
Brush your teeth.
We have that system in our household where we cultivate from an early age, because I'm all about critical thinking. I'm very heavy on that. So with my kids from an early age, we have the system. Whenever they want something, they have to give me 5 distinct reasons why. They have to articulate that. And with age, the requirements for the reasons goes up. So when they were young, like right now, my daughter is 4, a reason I want it suffices, but you have to give me 4 other ones. Brothers, that's only one. And saying I like it is not, so sometimes I accept it as a second one, sometimes I don't, depending on how difficult the ask is. And if she wants something that I would normally not condone, she has to really kind of like try and give me 5 reasons why. With my son now, we've been doing it with him 5 years now. So whenever he wants something, he already knows. He already prepared a list of reasons. He gives me, and he needs to articulate them. And I rebut sometimes, and I tell him this is not a good enough reason. You got to give me a different reason. Or I tell him this is the same 2 reasons, just articulated differently. Don't try to fool me. But he's learning to articulate his thoughts by telling me why he wants something. 5 different reasons why you want something. And when he was going to school here locally, right after COVID, we moved out of New York City. He was going to school. We told the teacher that. I'm like, you might find my son a little unconventional. If he wants something, he has to give you 5 reasons why. But if he does give you 5 reasons why, as long as it does not interfere with the classroom, please allow him to do that. And she's like, I love that, Zach. I actually will. This is pretty cool. So we teach him that. And now I've been working with him on critical thinking. And I'm still struggling to explain the number 1 rule of critical thinking to him, which most people think that follow the money is the number 1 rule, but it's not even top 3, actually. The number 1 rule of critical thinking is recognize and adjust for your own bias. Because if you don't do that, you're not thinking critically, right? So including your own bias into your thinking process is probably the hardest thing. And I'm still struggling.
It's almost impossible to do. Well, how old is your son?
9.
Yeah, so he's moving into that logic phase. That's when they'll start. That's when they'll start to kind of do that. That's when they start. If you're doing it right, that's when they start kind of meta-analysis, cognitive meta-analysis, right? Like, so they start being like, well, why do I think that? And is this the right, path? And so that's he'll and then those middle school years, that fifth through 8th grade, if they're in grades, is in that logic phase.
It's funny how we still think in grades, right? It's ingrained in us. We still think in grades.
It's really hard. Like, people will ask though, like, because I know where they are, like, in some ways, but like they're all over the place, right? When we were in Galapagos, we took them to this like graduate level, like biology lesson. And I was just like, they're not going to like this. And then they just sat, my oldest was in rapture. She was just like, oh, like, just like sat there, like, and like some of the adults were like falling asleep and she was like, I have a question. It's just so cool.
That's
To just
awesome.
watch her just be so excited about things. So
Well, Claire, this was awesome. And by the way, thank you for your time. But I also want to suggest that we have these, and this is why I'm hopeful about science, because I think Elon, by purchasing Twitter, now X, and giving us the platform to speak freely, there are a lot of people like you and I that just don't want to speak up because they don't want to have this uh, stigmatized. They don't want to be stigmatized. They don't want to get attacked. But they're looking for leadership. They're looking for
yeah,
people who will speak up. So I propose that we have these talks on X Spaces and talk about homeschooling, neuroscience, parenting, and just pick a topic. Do it once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month. Doesn't really matter. But as long as we have them, I think it will. There's this marketing term called "find your own voice." So
yeah,
we'll help you and I find our own voice, get our people to find us, and also help in the process because there's a lot of people that have questions that would love to hear honest feedback and not and have debates. Bring
yeah.
up other speakers that disagree and let's talk. Let's
Love
talk
that. Let's
because
go.
sometimes I engage with these teachers in the process online, and this is one of the best conversations we have. But it's very hard to have an honest dialogue back and forth via text.
Right.
It's the emotion is absent, and without the emotion, I don't know really if you agreeing with me or I know you're disagreeing with me, but I don't know how much. I'm
Right.
not sure. I can't really gauge where you're at. Are you even open to suggestions? Are you even open to other ideas, or are you completely shut down and you're right? This is one of the things that if you know you're right, I don't want to talk to you because I always know that I'm wrong. That's my always
Yeah.
approach in conversation. I'm like, okay, what if I'm wrong? Let me hear what this guy has to say. It's
Yeah.
how
You
I
have to
approach
put your head in someone
conversation.
else's for sure. Yeah, I'd be open to that. We'll have to talk about frequency. I still technically have my other job. I could do, it's like the longest goodbye ever. That's so I resigned in October. They have my resignation letter, but I don't actually get to quit till May 15th. So this spring is kind of bonkers. But I'd be happy to think to do them, sporadically now, and then we can think about doing it more
Love it.
seriously in the
Love it.
future.
So thank you
So
for your time. I
yeah,
hope we
no,
can work out
it's always
too.
great to meet like-minded people. And also I love how deeply you think about parenting. I just love, there's so many parents that just don't, they're just kind of like living it. And I'm like, no, like I've got some tidbits from today that I learned something and that's the best when you can learn from other people and it's
Thank you.
rare. So I really appreciate knowing you and getting to talk to you. It was fantastic.